Welcome back to another episode of Theology Applied. I am your host, Pastor Joel Webbin with Right Response Ministries. In this episode, I'm pleased to welcome back my personal friend, Jon Harris from Conversations That Matter. And we get blatantly honest in this particular episode, talking about the reality that Christians are an oppressed group. It may not be politically correct to say that, but we don't really care if it's politically correct. We're in the business of saying what is true. There are lots of individuals and certain groups that like to pretend that they're oppressed, but Christians actually are. Historically, Christians have always been persecuted. Jesus, in fact, said, the world is going to hate you. But it is a bit novel for us in the West, especially for us in America. But that's the world that we're coming into. We are coming into a world that increasingly is hostile and hates and even wants to shoot Christians, even if they're 9-year-old children. So how do we prepare to raise our kids, to protect our families, and to be bold for the gospel of Jesus Christ in the environment that we're coming into now? That's the episode. Tune in.
Applying God's word to every aspect of life. This is Theology Applied.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Theology Applied. I am your host, Pastor Joel Webbin with Right Response Ministries, and I'm privileged to have back on the show today a very special guest, Jon Harris with Conversations That Matter. Jon, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, my pleasure, Joel. Always good to talk with you.
You too. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and lead out with this episode. Just get right to it. We'll probably address a few different things, but the first thing that we wanted to address is the recent Nashville shooting that took place. And more information continues to come in. We haven't yet, at the time of this recording, so by the time this comes out, it'll probably be public information. I would hope so, because I think the public has an interest in knowing. But at this time, I don't think the manifesto has come out. Is that right, Jon?
Not to my knowledge. There seems to be like little leaks of, like I saw this morning, there was some message or text or something that implied that the shooter was going to go to other locations if possible, right, and kill family members. And so there's things like that coming out, but I haven't, the manifesto itself, no.
Right. And so what we know is, Covenant, I think it was just called Covenant School, the Covenant School. Is that right?
Yeah, Covenant School, Nashville. Actually, it's funny. I spoke at the church right across the street from there last year. So
really?
It's a big, It's a Southern Baptist church, and Covenant School is Presbyterian, but they're like right next to each other. And I think Covenant even used to use the building that I was speaking in. And it's, so it not that it hit close to home in a personal sense, but I was like, whoa, I know exactly where that is.
Right. Yeah. You can visualize it. So so the Covenant School, which is a school that's, belongs to a Presbyterian church. I'm assuming the church is maybe Covenant Church. I
believe so, yeah, if I'm not mistaken, yeah.
And then I think I heard, I could be wrong about this, but I think I heard that that Chris Wiley, C.R. Wiley is his author name, if you read like Man of the House or the Household and the War for the Cosmos. But I think his son is one of the elders at the church. And so
really?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I do know who he is. And I'm looking at the website right now for the school. I'm actually not 100% sure how associated it is with the church. It's a private school, but it is Presbyterian. So right.
Yeah, it may have its own 501c3, its own board, its own, those kinds of things, but still, right, affiliate and partner with the church, in a lot of ways, like Logos does with Wilson's church, Christ Church. Like they're separate entities, but that seems to be pretty common. But yeah, so as far as we know, it definitely, it's just crazy to me. One of the things that I've been addressing like on Twitter is just saying, I tweeted something the other day that said, if you can't as a Christian recognize the connection between these two narratives and reject both of them, then you need to wake up. And the two narratives that I put was, one was that a transgender murderer is not the victim, but 3 dead 9-year-old children and 3 adults also dead are the victims. And then the second statement that I said is that a woman who murders her child in the womb is not a victim, but the dead baby, and I look at this and you see some of the rhetoric already, of just, again, that, the real victim, those 3 dead 9-year-olds, they should have thought about that before they were such bigoted Christians. They drove her to it, or her parents drove her to it, and that's just become so commonplace. This, like somebody does something wrong and they're the victim, and this oppressed and oppressor classes, to where if you're in what society deems as an oppressed minority class, whether it be for sexual orientation, which is a misnomer, or whether it minority ethnicity, or even women who numerically outnumber men, but somehow is still a minority, in any of those ways, if you fall into the minority oppressed class, you're sinless. And evangelical pastors act like this when it comes to preaching on the sins of women, Mother's Day sermons versus Father's Day sermon. And so it really shouldn't be a surprise to us, the way that it's already being spun in the legacy media, this narrative of what happened. What are your thoughts, John?
I think it was an excellent tweet that you put out there. I did see that.
Oh, thanks.
And I would have retweeted if I had a Twitter account that I was still using, but yeah, there's a lot going on right now. I think one of the big debates that I see online is what you just said, whether or not there's 2 victims or 2 groups of victims here, the trans shooter and then the victims of the shooting. And then another debate is whether or not Christians are actually under persecution, and whether in fact, I have in front of me the Independent, in the UK, I guess magazine or newspaper has a headline: GOP lawmakers and far-right figures seize on Nashville shooting to push dangerous anti-trans rhetoric. And same thing in the Washington Post, same thing in the Vanity Fair, same kinds of headlines. So they're trying to prevent Christians from seeing this as targeting, or as something that's against them, that transgender people don't like them. They think that's a far right thing to say that. So that's another interesting facet. And then you even have like a breakdown in circles that we would be familiar with. I think I saw James Lindsay had posted something. I had it in front of me and now I can't find it, but essentially he was trying to say, don't fall into the trap. You might have seen this tweet of,
yep, I saw that. Seeing,
your Christian identity, falling into this like super Christian identity where you're having a bunker mentality and like it's trans versus Christians. And so he was critical of Tucker Carlson. I think actually though, what you said was good. I think what Tucker said, I don't know if you saw his segment. I thought that was really good. That was good analysis, fantastic. Because we all know what's going on as far, like not all the details, but we know in general, of course, there's anti-Christian rhetoric, and it's not surprising that would manifest in actions like this. Right.
Well, totally, especially when you think of just, especially young people, Zoomers, Gen Z, and a lot of their news, being from Twitter or TikTok or whatever, and those being just reshared with commentary, but clips of CNN, and just, the left-wing legacy media, or The View, the cuckling hens on The View, where, who was it? It may have been Joy Reid who recently said, they were asking like, what should we do about these people who want to make, women's healthcare rights illegal, making it illegal to have an abortion and murder your child. And she responded by saying, we should murder them. And, they kind of laugh and like, you're just joking, right? And she's just quiet and like looks down and smirks and rolls her eyes.
I haven't seen that. That's like really crazy.
And she doesn't correct it. She doesn't say like, yeah, I'm just kidding. She just like, smirks and rolls her eyes, and they move on, And so my point is like, one, you have this kind of violent language from the left. And I would say that it's somewhat common place these days. But then not just that, like the commonality of the violent language from the left toward conservatives and Christians, but more so than even that, I think for Gen Z, they're hearing, not actually from the right, but they're hearing the right's position twisted and repackaged from the left, and they're being told that we want to do violence towards them. Now, that's not actually true. like honestly, this is probably a bad analogy, but it reminds me of like Hamas, in Israel, like so I'm, we were talking about this earlier. I'm not a dispensationalist. I'm not a huge fan of the nation state of Israel today. I think that they're incredibly progressive and all these different things. But in terms of, ongoing battles between, Israel and Palestinians, I think if Palestinians said ceasefire, it'd be done. That the vast majority of Israel's weaponry is defensive, the Iron Dome and these kinds of things. You know what I mean? And like, there's one side that continually aggravates, and like one side protects their children in schools, namely Israel. The other side uses children to protect their bombs. And like literally, because they know Israel won't shoot innocents, and so they'll have children lined out in front of places that they don't want Israel to retaliate, because Israel actually has common decency and those kinds of things, and the Palestinians don't. They just don't. And so all that being said, my point is, like with the left and the right, with conservatives and progressives and these kinds of things, what's happening is like we're not actually firing. I don't see some huge rally and if for anybody who said, well, Trump rally, no, that's hyperbole and exaggeration and just downright deceit. You don't see a huge conservative rally where they're saying, let's take up arms and go and kill, trans people. No. Like we would condemn it. It would immediately be condemned. That is sin. That is wrong. That's grotesque. But you see like Michael Knowles with the Daily Wire, like we should eradicate, and he's so clear. The ideology is either true or it's not. If it's true for adults and it's true for kids. But if transgenderism as an ideology is not true, then it's not true for anyone. Not just only kids shouldn't be chemically castrated, but adults shouldn't either. And we should eradicate transgender people? No, the transgender ideology from every facet of our society, because it's negative and does harm. And he says this at NatCon or whatever, and immediately major publications are saying, Daily Wire, Michael Knowles calls for the eradication of transgender people. And what I'm getting at is, okay, we know that's a lie, but what about the 19-year-old Gen Z transgender person that's their only news source? They think that's real. They think that we are taking up arms. We're not. But they are actually taking up arms because they think we are, and I don't see this going away. Do you?
No, it's not just deception, because I think that is part of it, as you just correctly articulated, but it's also the fact that, well, there's a couple things, but one is that there's a study I just saw it's out of Canada, but transgender and gender diverse students in this study reported higher supports for violent, being radicalized by violence compared to students who identified as women. And then it goes on to different categories, but there's already something about, and I think the theologians can actually figure this out better than anyone in the world who's trying to figure this out. But there's something already violent about becoming transgender in your mind, about starting to lop off organs and change organs. And there's something violent about that. There's something that's negative about concerning the effects of the hormones that you're receiving, which makes you emotionally unstable as well. And so you have that biological element, but you have also that ideological element, sacrificing body parts for an ideology. And some of this is perhaps also a third avenue would be it's just reduced to hatred for the truth. I mean, that's nothing new. That's been around forever. It predated the recent transgender movement. So
I mean, Jesus told us the world hates you.
Yeah.
Because it hated me first. Like people absolutely hate the truth. Like the one guy who was the embodiment of truth, who only told the truth, who never lied. And the one time in all of history that one guy, namely the second member of the eternal Trinity, God, actually made himself vulnerable and took on flesh and dwelt among us, we loved him and threw a party. No, people killed him. They nailed him to a tree, so so I think there's the spiritual element of the hatred for the truth and hatred of God, who is immortal, but his image bearers and ambassadors, even more so. Everyone's his image bearer, Christian or not, but ambassadors, namely Christians, you can't kill God, but you can kill his people. And if you want to stick it to the man, but the man is untouchable, he's immortal, he's invulnerable, invincible, then what do? Well, you kill the messenger. You kill the ones that God deeply cares for, who are like sheep among wolves, who are vulnerable, who are weak, who are touchable and killable. And so there's a spiritual element of it. You're right. Like, just to become transgender, there's a physical violence that the person has to be willing to undergo. Then there's the so spiritual, physical, there's the chemical side of it. Like, what happens when it's one I mean, our little boys, we have to train them from birth as they grow up. We have to train our young boys that self-control is not effeminate, it's not emasculate, but it is strength. But it is strength that has been harnessed. Self-control is strength under control. But what do you do with a girl that's never had that kind of training because she hasn't really needed it? I'm not saying women don't have, that the fruit of the Spirit, that is self-control, exclusively belongs to the male population and that there's no female equivalency. Of course there is. So hear me in that. But it is different. It is different for a woman to be self-controlled and for a man to be self-controlled. And if a woman who's 19 years old has never had to practice, because there's a discipline. Every man knows we have been practicing, and we're not always conscious of it. A lot of it is subconscious, but we've been trained, and we also have trained ourselves, self-disciplined and practicing. For 36 years now, I have been practicing harnessing my testosterone. And you're a 19-year-old woman who's never had testosterone, not like that, not even close. And all of a sudden, there is an actual drug, a chemical that is being pumped into your veins that is a foreign substance to you. That because it's one thing to learn how to control testosterone when you're 2, and you can only do so much damage, right? When the stakes are lower in terms of your training, your practice, and under the tutelage and the guidance of your parents in the safety of a home and all. But could you imagine, like, a young boy who I don't know, was put on ice or something like that, and then all of a sudden came out, having gone through puberty, and now he's 19 years old, and he's probably going to be a little wild. And so there's the chemical element, the spiritual element, the physical element, and then there's the social, political element of just you just have constant lies. It's like the media and our politicians working hand in glove in lockstep, constantly putting fuel and gasoline on the fire and ramping it up. And now we have like a trans day of vengeance. Do you know anything about that, John?
Not a lot. It's kind of, I actually have it pulled up because I was going to talk about it later on my podcast.
Oh, okay. Well, feel free to save it for yours.
Well, no, I wasn't going to mention anything beyond that. It's announced. That's pretty much it. Okay. Like, I don't know many details beyond that.
The date? What's the date?
Let's see if I can find it. I have so many tabs open. I'm not sure off the top of my head what the date for it is. It was floating around all over online though, and people were
maybe you can find it. But if you don't, Christians, like, I would urge you.
It was blocked. It was blocked on Twitter when. I don't know if you know this, but so the reason I was going to talk about it was because Marjorie Taylor Greene shared it, and then she was suspended for 7 days on Twitter for sharing it.
Wow.
I think some other people were also suspended, or they couldn't get into their accounts after sharing, and it had been out there before, not conservative sharing it, but of course, people who are more on the left, and it wasn't banned. And so Twitter's saying that this is because they don't allow violence to be shared. And so they're censoring it, but they're doing more than censoring it. Twitter is shutting down, censoring, and also locking people out of their Twitter accounts if they're conservative and they've shared this. What? So that's a little bit of a controversy right now. I know Elon Musk made things better on Twitter, but it's not 100%. There's still some problems.
Right.
So,
wow.
Well, yeah, I don't know what I actually have it right in front of me, and it doesn't even say what date.
If anybody knows what date it is, leave it in the comments, because Christians, we need to be aware, not to be aggressive, but to be defensive, to be wise and shrewd and careful God forbid, I mean, it could all just be a hoax, but these things happen, and I think about, like local churches that, that preach the gospel, that preach the scripture, that preach, male and female, he created them, that God is God and that we are not, that God determines our sex from the womb and our gender is synonymous with our sex. Those kind of, beliefs that, the beliefs that the entire world held for all of human history until 15 minutes ago, those kinds of beliefs are now deemed as radically oppressive, bigoted, hateful beliefs, and it's not hyperbole, it's not exaggeration to say that it does make you, to some degree, a target. There are terrible people in the world who want to kill Christians, and not just in the Middle East, but that is starting to happen here.
Right. And we should expect that. That's going to be the reaction of sinful people when we're a constant reminder of the fact that they're under judgment. Right. And that's what they don't like. I think one of the things that I've been thinking about and pondering, because I'm writing another book, and we're in a very transitional period right now, I think, in Western civilization, where we've gone from Christian, primarily people having Christian mores, we're returning to paganism now. I don't know if you saw this morning in Kentucky, there was a bunch of people are at the Kentucky State House lobbying against, or really they were protesting, the law that just passed that banned transgender operations for those under 18.
For minors, I did see that. It looked like a January 6th kind of thing. Like they had all these state troopers they looked like state troopers with the hats and but having to kind of barricade, and they were, trying to push in.
Well, one of the guys leading it, he looked more pagan, more satanic than the January 6th shaman, right?
Really?
He was.
I didn't see that.
Oh yeah. And I know some people online were saying he was an actual Satanist. I'm not sure if that's true or not. I haven't confirmed it, but there in my area where I live right now, very liberal, a lot of transgenderism, transgender flags, all that stuff. And the paganism is right now growing like crazy. Like you go into my local Barnes and Noble and the whole display shelf is just books on casting spells, crystals. That's all it is.
Wow.
And I'm not saying that the two are, I'm saying they are related. I'm not saying that if you have one, you're necessarily going to have the other, but they tend to show up together.
Right.
And so I think you and I we grew up at the tail end, being millennials, of kind of the last kind of gasping breath of a liberal neutral order, where we were still kind of riding these Christian assumptions, thinking that those were just going to carry us into a secular world where we'd still hold on to them. And in a very naive way, I suppose, our parents thought that, our grandparents probably thought that, but we were the last generation in that. And the Gen Z, I think, is where it's a return to paganism now. And the transgenderism is coming along with that. And that's what pagans love to do. Like I'm talking about satanic, occultic, pagan stuff. Like they love to destroy God's order, break down categories, merge things. It's chaos. It says in scripture, right? What does Satan do? Kills, steals, destroys. Right. It's the destruction of the categories of even men and women, which is so basic.
Mm-hmm. And we always think of abortion as a sacrament, a sacrament of the left and a sacrament of the left being pagan. That it's not just secular. I like what you're saying, John, because you're absolutely right. I think secularism is not a viable position. And now, no position except for Jesus is Lord, is a viable position in the long-term, indefinite, eternal sense. But there are certain false religions that are more viable in a human, temporal sense than secularism. Islam will outlast secularism. Secularism it's a virus, or better, it's like a parasite. It cannot survive on its own. It has to have a host. And Christendom was a really powerful host, and so it's, with a host like that, that parasite can, last for, since the Enlightenment, still counting it, but, maybe 350, 400, 500 years. But eventually, secularism will either kill Christendom in the West, it won't kill Christ, it won't kill Christianity globally, and I believe, God is sovereign, and we'll see an upswing in the future, but Christendom could be completely dismantled in the West. that's not a biblical promise that we have, that, the West shall endure forever. We don't have that. So if that happens, though, if secularism destroys it, then secularism also destroys itself. It kills itself. Whereas certain forms of paganism, so I think of Islam, like Islam it's a Christian heresy, right? So it is a heresy, but it's a Christian heresy. It plays off of God's created order. Meaning it has a rule book that does have a certain degree of viability. Like, for instance, Muslims have kids, right? You think of just practical things for something to be viable, that it actually has like some longevity, a lifespan. It can live for a while. Secularism doesn't have that. Secularism, it just, the moment it kills the host, it dies. Whereas Islam, has longevity. It has distinctions between men and women. It has hierarchy. It has patriarchy. It has, it's pro-children. It has justice and things like that. Now, we would disagree with, some of the penalties, Sharia law and some of these kinds of things, but it does have a system of law and rules and those kinds of things that mirrors, in many ways, Christian law. And so all that being said, secularism is a placeholder. Secularism is a parasite that I think was kind of like, like some of those like horror sci-fi movies where you have a particular enemy and you release another monster to kill that enemy, knowing that monster. And I think that's what like pagans have done with secularism, is like, we hate Christianity. We've got to unleash the hounds. We've got the hounds of hell, secularism. Like, not that. Well, not Frankenstein's monster, but like you unleash that, but you're like, it's okay, guys, because it'll kill Christianity. And it's like a bee that after it stings, it dies, it loses its, and so it'll die too. And then we'll have our real thing, which is, it's Satanism. It's worship of a false god. It is, and I think that's just inescapable. This whole, sophisticated, secular, scientific, like it's always every now and then the veil keeps getting lifted up. You know what I mean? And it's like your religion is showing the science. Yeah. Like, I am science, and it's a religion. It's not this neutral analytical lens. There is a God, there is an orthodoxy, there is blasphemy, there are sacraments, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah. There's a great sifting happening right now. There's a great sort, whether you are, that's often attributed to moving to different areas, like moving to where you are because it's more conservative than California. But the great sort is happening in all kinds of different areas. Companies, I saw JP Spears, who's a comedian on YouTube a few days ago, made a whole video about how basically, and I don't know if he's saved, but he's like way closer to Christianity than he was even 2 years ago. And he attributes it to how evil things are. And he just can see, he can't deny there's evil in front of me. Like, I need God if this is the world I'm inhabiting. And it's sort of shocking people into taking a side, whether are we going to be on Christ's side or are we going to be on the side of the devil? And those are the two options. And we do need to, I think, press that going back to what James Lindsay had put on Twitter, he said that he implied that the reason that leftists, the woke, he said, hate Christianity is because it's a feature of Western civilization, right? And so we shouldn't buy into the narrative of it's Christians versus transgender people. We should see it for what it is. It's like an attack on Western civ. But if you think about it, that's also identity. You're also, and it doesn't actually solve the issue. You're not retreating to a neutral place where it's like, well, Western civ transcends identity. What Western civ is also, it might be broad, but it's also an identity to say, I'm a part of Western civ. And what do you mean by that is the other question. So what do you mean you're part of Western civilization? Does that mean you value scientific inquiry and the Enlightenment, or are you more in the Reformed, the Christian side of that? Because those are also two different things. And Western civilization can be broad. You can go back to Greco-Roman myths. You can go back to the Bible, and you're in Western civ tradition. And so the only point I really wanted to make on that is just that don't disbelieve what your eyes are seeing right now. It is the world lined up against Jesus Christ and those who represent him. Jesus said it would be that way. It's not because of Western civ. ultimately. I'm not saying they don't hate Western Civ, but they hate Christ.
They hate
and it's
Western
more the other way.
Civilization because it was built
Bingo.
by Christianity.
It's exactly. Exactly. It's more like that's why they hate Western Civ.
Exactly. It's the opposite of what James Lindsay is saying. It's not, they don't hate Christianity, they hate Western civilization. No, they hate Christianity, and therefore they're attacking, the things that Christianity, they're deconstructing everything that Christianity has built. Right. And Western civilization is one of those things. I remember thinking about this all the way back in 2018 when I was leaving Acts 29 and thinking okay, what's the one common denominator? All right, what are all the things that are hated? And they weren't blatantly saying we hate these things, but I knew I was a white, male pastor in Acts 29, and I'm watching, and I knew, it's obvious. We can say it now. In 2018, it was really hard to say. And I said some of these things, and I, kind of got in trouble and was warmly asked to leave. And then I chose to leave, and those kinds of things. But I remember thinking, if I was a black pastor, I'm white. If I was black, I would have 10 times the opportunity in Acts 29. Guaranteed.
Oh yeah. Probably
objectively.
More. Yeah.
Definitive statement. That's absolutely true. I know I would. I absolutely know I would. And so I was thinking, my whiteness, right, is not appreciated here. And hated might have been a strong term at the time, but it was a subtle form of hate. It was discrimination. And so white, okay, and then male. Right, I started noticing not just in Acts 29, but all across. We see it in the SBC. We see it all over, and that's just evangelical. It's all just as bad, if not worse, in the world. Except the SBC usually can keep par with the degrees of immorality of the world. So I can't say the world's worse necessarily than the SBC.
There's a shadow that follows it, yeah, from a distance.
But the whole, believe all women, the whole hashtag Me Too, hashtag Church Too, hashtag, so then it's okay, so we hate white, we hate male, we hate straight. Cisgendered, whatever that is. We hate children, right? So then, and I just started looking at all these things, and I'm thinking, where can I connect these dots? Where is a common denominator? And the scientific method, being on time, promptness is whiteness, and I started realizing along the way, I was they don't hate whiteness, they hate Christ. They don't hate Western civilization, they hate Christ. They don't hate patriarchy even. They hate Christ. Patriarchy, whiteness, all these things and that's not to say that whiteness is synonymous with the Christian faith. That is only to say there's nothing inherently more Christian about being white. It's not an argument from something being inherent. I'm simply saying that providentially, in God's providence, there has been massive revival and Christendom established for the last 500 years, arguably 1,000 years if we go back to King Alfred, primarily in Western, predominantly white countries. And if it doesn't change, I had another tweet the other day where I said, sometime soon, seeing Uganda in the position that they're taking against LGBT, laughing at it, which is good to mock and to laugh. This is ridiculous. No way. But I posted a clip of, Ugandans celebrating, overruling. And I said, very soon, if the West doesn't repent, they'll be running commercials in Uganda that say for just $1 a day, you can support a little white kid in America and give him a Christian education.
Oh no, that's good.
Because it's not inherent to pigment, skin pigment, and ethnicity. It's just in God's providence. For 1,000 years, he's done a lot among white people.
And we can prove this point easily, Joel, even with what I said about what's happening in the Kentucky legislature this morning. These neo-pagan ideas, or this rising neo-paganism, primarily they're trying to draw from Norse mythology, and it's really the mythology of Europe more broadly. I don't really know all the differences, but there's the Welsh and right. Irish and all these different pagan kind of deities that were the pre-Christian understandings. They were pagans, right? And so that's what they think that they're going back to, and they don't have any problem with that. Those people were white, but they have no problem with appropriating white European culture as long as it's not Christian.
Yeah.
And this is on the transgender side of it. So they just don't say that that's part of whiteness. So when they talk about whiteness, they're talking about something specific, and Christianity seems to be related to it to some extent. And really their goal is to rip down the society that we live in and all the institutions in it that white people who were influenced by Christianity set up.
Right.
And so and we're still in the process of ripping those things down. So as long as the ripping down is happening, I think you're going to see this. Now, when the building up starts happening, which maybe that's already started. But when that really gets going, it's going to look a little different, I think. You're going to start to see more overt implementation of pagan rituals into our society. Our calendar is going to look pagan. It's already starting on that. Mm-hmm. We're going to be celebrating, things. We might even be celebrating things like the solstice and so forth. Mm-hmm. I mean, I would not be surprised if I've lived to see a day where if things continue as they are, again, I'm hoping they don't, right? Right. And I know you're definitely hoping.
But just for the record, as someone who's post-mill, right? We live in the light of eternity. Christians can afford to be patient. It's entirely possible within my eschatological framework that for the next 550 years, God forbid, but if he sees fit, 500 years, that the West could be absolutely decimated. We could go back to a stone age. We could, lose technology. All these kind of horror things could happen. I just think that, if that happens for 500 years, well, then we're going to have at least another 5,000 years for it to be I just think that it's going to be one step back, 10 step back. But if it's one step back, it'll be 2 forward. If it's 10, it'll be 20, So that's all I hold to as a post-millennial. I have no promise in the Bible for America. I'm praying for America. I want America to be a Christian nation. I know you do too. But I don't have any, America can be wiped out. I just think that the nations are Christ's inheritance, and progressively, not the cataclysmic, suddenly, soon eschatology, but the gradualistic, progressive, victorious, hopeful eschatology that Christ will win the hearts of the nations progressively throughout human history over time. But that could be 40,000 years from now.
You're not a boomer con. That's all. Yeah. That's why you don't think America's part of this, right? That's or doesn't have to be, I should say. Right. Yeah. Which is what I see a lot of the guys with that eschatology who are more boomer cons. They definitely see it. Anyway, that's it. We're on a tangent. I know
what you're saying.
We're kind of getting far from the school shooting here, but yeah. So we were talking about the transition though from the Christian society and then this temporary holding mechanism of liberal democracy, secular, to now the start. I think Gen Z is the start of the return to paganism, and it's already happened in Europe. I think Europe, if we look to Europe, we can get a glimpse into our future a little bit. And I don't know how many years, depending on the European nation, but if you look at Germany, for example, we're probably looking at things that are 20 years, maybe less now with technology, at least 10 years ahead or behind, depending on how, regression. The Netherlands, right? The Netherlands, there's a video going around. You might have seen it of I think it's national television. So it's his public television in the Netherlands. And it's a bunch of transgender people lined up naked, literally naked. And of course they blurred it out in the version going around on Twitter, and they have kids, little kids in the room, in the audience. And it's a very nice studio. And it's an interview. The kids are, I know what you're talking about. Have you seen this?
I watched 2 seconds and I couldn't do it. I just turned it off. And I took William Wolf's word for it. I pretty much all the videos that I can't stand to watch, I know that William Wolf is going to be retweeting that video. I'll read his summary, and that'll be sufficient. And I'll just say, yeah, I agree with him. So go ahead.
I couldn't watch the whole thing either. But you see that's a level of your jaw's just on the floor. It's like, this is accepted. And the kids are saying, every kid said it was normal. That they were celebrating it, that they felt one of the young ladies who had her breasts removed was standing there just saying how euphoric she felt when it happened and empowered. And so this is celebrated. If you look at some of the ceremonies that take place in the government, there was a tunnel that I think it was in Germany, if I'm not mistaken, that was this was now a few years ago that was built, and you had Angela Merkel there and just all these dignitaries, and their opening ceremony was complete paganism. And I know when the Olympics, the last Olympics that happened, I think it was the same thing. I know that I get sent these videos now and then from Europe of can you believe that the civil rulers came and Prince Charles is participating in this, bull that's right there looking like a satanic bull they're all worshiping. And I'm like, yeah, I can believe that, because that's what happens when you eradicate Christianity. It doesn't return to secularism and that, we all have common ground now. We're just going to treat each other nice. That whole treat each other nice is from Christianity.
Right. That's right.
So I'm pretty adamant on this. And I'm not trying to. James Lindsay was just one of the few people that I came to my mind because I was recently looking at that tweet. It's not unique to him. I have nothing against him, but this is a mentality that I think a lot of, especially older folks in Gen X and the boomers, it's like, I don't want to overly psychologize this, but I think because they remember some element of neutrality that seemed to work in their minds, right, they think we can return to it. Mm-hmm. And no, we can't.
Right. And the neutrality never worked. It was almost like having, I think it was just, in that moment in history, you have the tides are shifting and you're going from predominantly Christian and minority being pagan. And then all of a sudden there's this moment that lasted for about a generation or two, or maybe three at most, where it's, okay, the Christian tide is going out because of apostasy and sin and rejection of Christ. And the pagan tide is coming in, but we hit this brief moment that lasted, 40, 50, 60, 70 years. But in the light of eternity, it's very brief, where you had about 50-50, right? The Christian tide's going out, the pagan tide's coming in, and they're about equal for a moment. And it gave the illusion of neutrality. But it was never neutrality. The only thing that made it seem like neutrality is that there was still enough Christian tide pushing back the threat of Satan that was coming in to where it, but that is not a viable, that's not a holding zone. That's not a viable, sustainable position. That's classical liberalism, I think, is will be, viewed as one of history's greatest jokes, that we'll look back on and laugh about. Libertarianism is a really great joke, but the problem is that the joke's on us, or at least on our parents and prior generations, and still some guys today just still have not gotten the joke. Well, but that's going out. We're in trouble. The solution is Christ. It's a return to Christ. He has a name. It's not just principled pluralism. There is a name of all truth. He is a person. It's the Lord Jesus Christ. Apart from that, we are screwed.
I was interviewing a scholar recently for the 1607 Project. And he's a political philosopher, and so he's not a Christian. Now, everyone on that project is either Christian or very pro-Christian. Like, they see the necessity of having a Christian civilization. They're not blind to the fact that it's really bad when you get rid of Jesus. But this particular individual was not. And he said to me something I thought was interesting, Joel. He goes, well, paganism seemed to work, kind of. And he goes, and Christianity seems to work. But this whole, liberal democracy thing, that can't work. And of course, I don't think paganism really works, but I know what he meant by it. And I think this is what you just mentioned libertarians. I think this is what libertarians and boomer cons and neocons, I think they don't tend to see this as clearly. The way that communities in God's providence and his design function, communities aren't just composites of individuals, right? Going after their own interests and capable of peaceably coexisting together as they pursue their own varied interests. Communities actually have much more of a symbiosis. And actually communists, I think, though they pervert this quite a bit and they try to make it abstract and try to make the state the one that communities coalesce around, so they pervert everything, they kind of get this a little better than even libertarians, that actually man was created to be in community. When you're born, you are born into a community and you have immediately responsibilities that are attached to you. I mean, you're benefiting from the fire department. You're benefiting from the medical, establishment. You're benefiting from all the different resources and institutions in your society. And that's why good model citizens, when they grow up, they get involved, right? And it used to be the model citizen in Norman Rockwell world was he goes to the not Second Presbyterian Church. He's an elder there, and he's on the volunteer fire department, and they're very involved people because
the Lions Club.
They have
remember that?
The what? What
the
club?
Lions Club. Remember those?
Oh, I don't know about that.
Okay,
the Lions. Yes. No, I do know about that. Yes. Yeah. And there used to be all these civic organizations. He goes to the bowling club on Tuesday night, right? These voluntary associations are kind of gone now. Mm-hmm. But that was the way that a lot of these people who grew up in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, that's what they remember, and even 80s to some extent. They remember that time when that was the model citizen, and so I think there's an assumption that you can just kind of keep living that way with this Christianity kind of running in the background, because that's what's telling you should love your neighbor. But now we've gotten rid of the whole foundation for that society, and we've gotten rid of the glue that keeps us together as a community. We've thrown out the whole mechanism's thrown out, and for libertarians, it's, I think, a lot of the secular ones, they are looking at man as God, as man is self-sufficient in and of himself. He doesn't have any obligations, and somehow you think that's going to work for society. It can't, and it's not going to. Since man is a social creature, it cannot prevent the other Gen Z folks from being swept up into the woke movement, because they're going to look at that and they're going to see, oh, I have identity in that. I have community in that. I was made to have responsibility. It gives me a purpose. They're going to run right towards that, rather than a message of, you figure out your own purpose. We don't really have a purpose as a group together, and you're your own thing. Like, that's the kiss of death. So I probably sounds too strong on this, but
no, I think you're right.
I do not want Christians falling for that. You have to, your community matters, right? As far as your identity, but your primary identity is in Christ. And that's why these other things, they all line up under that. And you got to wear that on your sleeve. I'm sorry. Like, making fun of Christians because they wear it on their sleeve too much, because it's too much part of their identity. No, ramp it up 10. That's what I say.
Yep. Amen. So as we're kind of heading towards a conclusion here, what do you think, like, what are some practical things that Christians can do? I mean, first and foremost, I mean, this is a spiritual thing that we can do. But I'm not trying to sound pious, but I've just, as a dad with young kids, and knowing that, like, my face is on the internet saying some hashtag based things that liberals would hate to hear. And, and just thinking about, like, somebody wanting to kill my kids, because there's a pastor in Tennessee right now whose kid just died, was just killed by an unstable, insane transgender person. And they are, of course they're insane. They don't know what gender they are, and so knowing that is a real possibility, because it literally just happened. I'm just, I'm praying like that. I have found myself the last few days just praying more. I try to pray regularly regardless, but my prayer life has had a good uptick, because I feel like, God, we need you, because I'm just thinking, like, they say, at any given point, we're only 9 meals away from anarchy, and these, because I'm thinking, like, okay, get a gun. Just practical, get a gun, move off the reservation a little bit if you can. Like right now we live in a nice neighborhood, but it's a neighborhood. It's a cookie cutter neighborhood, and having some land, being in just a physically more defensible position, a little bit further back from town, and not right in the middle of, a bunch of people who had Beto signs in their front yard just a few months ago. You know what I mean? Like, that person's not my friend. That person is not on the same team, and not saying I'm against them, but they are against me. And they probably just haven't found my YouTube channel yet. But what if they do? Like, these are real kind of scenarios. And so, get some land, get a gun, have some food reserves, try to plant a garden, those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, I'm just thinking, we're talking about an entire generation of people who are growing up, they are mentally unstable. This Gen Z generation is like, it's scary. And I know there's some good ones that, like, because in God's providence, it's kind of like this this harsh split where there's, crazy God-hating progressive Gen Z, and then there's some, like, ultra conservative 17-year-olds who love, who love the Lord, and who are, outspoken about their Christianity, and praise God for them. But I'm just thinking, man, practically, prayer is what I just keep coming back to, but practically, what do we do to, like, I've got a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 6-month-old. And I'm thinking, they could be killed. And we say that in the past. I'm feeling it now. Like, no, that really could happen.
No, same. Yeah. I this whole thing put me in a mood for like 2 days of, like, and just walking around like feeling heavy.
Yep, that's how I felt. Yeah.
And shootings happen. Like there's been other shootings, and I felt kind of heavy. This one's different for me. I think it's because it's an attack on, like, those are my people,
Yep.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That's part of it. And then to see the reaction is not universal condemnation. It's among very powerful members of the media trying to flip the script. And
Right.
I'm just like, what in the world? This isn't the country that I remember growing up in. And it's not.
It's real quick. I think it's three things.
yeah.
These are our people, so we identify with them because they're brothers and sisters in Christ, Christians. It's also, the way that the culture has responded to it, saying, well, the true victim is the person who murdered 3 9-year-old children. Like, so that's crazy. But then the third thing, I think that why I felt so heavy, and I've had to just go to the Lord, right, to be anxious about nothing, but with prayer and stuff. So I've been anxious a little bit, and that's in that I believe that's a sin.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying, when I get anxious, when I get scared, because I get scared, believe it or not, people think like, Joel, say anything. He's not, but I get scared about my kids, and so I just have to go to God and repent of my fear and pray. So instead of being anxious, do not be anxious for anything, but with prayer and supplications, make your requests known to God. And it's because of this third one. One, there are people, they're Christians. Two, the way that all the lies about it, and it's seen the cultural backlash. But then three, a lot of the shootings before, one of the ways this is different is they were at public schools. And honestly, I just have to confess, I don't know if I was, maybe it was subconscious, but one way or another, where conscious or subconscious, I have been harboring and cherishing the idea in my mind that, terrible things happen in the world, but I can avoid them because I won't put my kids in public school. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
but then seeing this, and right now being in the process with a team of people in my church to start a classical Christian school that I plan on my kids going to, and just seeing it and being like, we're not safe. I thought that, like, it's always a shame. It's a tragedy when an image bearer dies. But if parents really want to, they can escape that, right? Like, get out of California. Right. I did. Get out of the public schools. I did. And it turns out you can live in Nashville, Tennessee as a Presbyterian, putting your kids in a private classical Christian school, and you could still get a phone call and find out that they're lying in a pool of their own blood. We are not safe. We are not safe.
It's a good reminder, though, that that's how Christians lived for centuries, knowing that could happen. And this world is not our home. It's temporary, but we do live here for now, and we're responsible for what God's given to us and to be good stewards, but the rest, the results belong to Him. I was talking about this with an Episcopal priest, believe it or not, who's conservative, one of the last few remaining ones, I suppose. Right. And one of the things I thought was really interesting, he was saying, because he said, we're always on the defensive. We need to go on the offensive here, culturally speaking. We just haven't done that. We're so used to playing defense. And he said, it's been hard to do that, though, on the national level, because you can only rise so far in an institution before you're zapped. The door is shut to you because your beliefs are way too out of step with those running those institutions. So the only thing what we really have is authority on the local level, which he does have. He said that he goes, 90% of my church is probably pro-gay marriage. This guy is so anti-gay marriage, but he's an Episcopal priest, so go figure that out. And he said, though, that, and so he says he doesn't even have a church, right? These are people that attend that don't even know the Lord, but he said most of them defend him, that he won't participate in that. He showed up at the local school, to oppose their diversity agenda. And he was successful on the local level. And so you can kind of create a shield around your local community and gain rapport and gain leadership and gain respect with people in your local community that you would never be able to do on a national level. And if we can reciprocate, like repeat that all over the place, then I think that is a shield. So that's one strategy, I think, local strategy. The other thing is what you did. And I think of what Jesus did in Luke 4 as kind of what you did. It says, but he passed through their midst and went on his way when the Pharisees were trying to push him off a cliff. Right. So he avoided, he didn't directly confront in that situation. He knew they were threatening his life and it wasn't his time. And so he passed through the crowd. So if you can move from a place where you're potentially in a greater threat to a place where you're have less of a threat, then there's nothing wrong with that. Jesus did the same thing. It doesn't mean that you're 100% safe, right? But your children could also get a life-threatening disease, right? It doesn't have to be someone who comes in and hates them for being Christians. So I think what you're doing too, when praying, that's so key in all of this. Like, we could take all the precautions, all the strategies, do everything right, and we're still not going to outgame this thing, because there's no outgaming it without God blessing our efforts. And it really has to be his efforts that we're just part of. So
that's helpful, Jon.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, any last words? Tell our listeners, let's go ahead and conclude, but tell them how to follow you, but also tell them how, just briefly, because you mentioned it, but maybe just a quick synopsis about the 1607 Project and how they can support that.
Yeah, I appreciate you plugging that. Yeah, 1607project.com. You can donate 501c3, so it's tax deductible. It's a project that I'm working on right now that is meant to answer the 1619 Project and give a correct understanding of American history, what makes America unique. We do have a great section on Christianity, so it's going to be an essay, a series of essays, and also which will be put into a book, a documentary. I'm in charge of the documentary. Cool. But I just had Zach Garris out last weekend. He's the one that's dealing with early American religion, and it was great. I mean, he loves the Lord. I know you've had him on your show. So if anyone wants to support that, you can go to 1607project.com to follow me, worldviewconversation.com, and there's all the links to social media there.
Great. Okay, Jon. Thanks for coming on the show, and everybody, thanks for listening.
My pleasure. Thanks, Joel.